And good evening, and welcome to another exciting episode. I'm making a bold prediction, hot take, of the 5280 podcast on the MHRT network. I am Glenn Hauser, sitting in again for Mike. This guy is. Did we put him on like the short-term IR? Did we suspend him? Did he refuse to go into the game? What happened here?
He continues to have bad takes about Travis Hunter, and until he comes around, we are putting him on IR.
I think it's personally, reasonable. I feel like, we have to put him on the short-term IR until he really understands that he is the Heisman Trophy winner and he was, deserving, if you will, of the award. I feel like, he kind of needs to be kept at bay just a little bit.
I know when Mike's talking about Travis Hunter, IR stands for idiotic response. But I'm joined by Cam Parker and Gage Madrid per usual, and we're excited to talk about another Broncos victory, now 4 in a row. This one was the hot and cold game, cold and hot game, whatever you'd like to call it. But you guys were actually in the stadium, and I just kind of want to get a feel as to describe that first half and just your overall experience in that the opening moments of this game.
You go first, Gage.
Okay, so that atmosphere was just kind of a roller coaster. Cam was kind of bringing it up in the pregame when we were chatting about how the first half of that game, it was just kind of a dead energy after the Colts got out to that 10-0 start. They converted a couple of third down and longs on their opening possession, and that pretty much killed any momentum that the crowd had. The first couple of plays, the crowd was into it. They were fired up. Indianapolis converts those third downs, and then Anthony Richardson runs it in for a touchdown on that read option. And I think the collective sense in the stadium was, oh, no, here we go again. This is the Patriots game from last year all over again. We're going to completely crap the bed in a moment that we have a chance to actually do something important. And ultimately, the energy in the stadium reflected that. But everything changed once Jonathan Taylor fumbled at the goal line. I don't know if the TV camera caught it or not, but they were holding up the extra point. We didn't know what it was. I was just assuming maybe he stepped out of bounds or something like that. And then they show it on the Jumbotron. They show that football is moving, and the stadium shook at that point. And after that, it was just all was let loose after that.
Yeah, Big Mike says, I sent a message to a group chat that led to someone checking on me when I didn't answer in 5 minutes. That's how the first half happened.
Yeah, I kind of piggyback a little bit off of Gage. Like it was. Like what I say, it felt almost like a graveyard, in the first quarter to maybe even into that second quarter. And, it was, I will say something was off too. So I don't know if Gage noticed this too, just in warmups, but it looked like Bo was kind of sailing some passes a little bit, in warmups. And it kind of caught my eye just a little bit, and obviously it carried, into the game itself. So something was kind of off there at the beginning. But boy, what they say tale of two cities, right? Well, it was the tale of two halves, for the Denver Broncos offense, if you will. But it was so electric just being a part of that game. Like it was. For a game that you won by 18, it's wild to still have the same conclusion, that you've always had so far on some games this year, which is, I don't know if they win this game in the last 8 years, a game like that in the last 8 years. So it is so wild having that kind of, conversation that here's a game where they won by 18, double digits, and you're kind of talking to yourself of like, they really should not have won this game. And, and it's the first time, obviously being in a stadium where, Jonathan Taylor, Danny Trevathan, a situation, you know what I mean? Like, so it's wild to see all of that unfold in exactly the way that Gage explained it. I mean, he walks into the end zone and it was the true, oh no, to like, what just happened? Like, like the complete, 180 of emotions. And so, I mean, like it was so wild. And obviously we're going to there's obviously a few plays here and there that turned the tide on the game, but I think it's really easy to say that Jonathan Taylor was the one that really turned it all around. Because like that, from that moment, the Broncos outscored them 24-0 since that point.
It kind of gave me
7 lead.
Yeah, it kind of gave me engaged. We were sitting together for that the Raiders game. The vibes where they were driving, and it looked like things were going to really get out of hand pretty early on. And that's when the Surtain pick six happened. Mm-hmm. And to actually have a game-changing play happen at the hands, just at the stupidity. We call it a fumble, but it was not a fumble. Like it's a legitimate thought of dropping the ball, grandstanding. I don't know what. I don't know how this keeps happening. And a smart guy like Jonathan Taylor, an accomplished player, a captain of the team, to do that at that time. I mean, that changed everything. You were just saying it was going to be a 20-7 game, and the Broncos were really not showing much life as far as being able to get things going.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's all you need. And when you get that crowd of 76,000 fans going bananas, I mean, that just propels the team to so many great things.
Now, I do have to bring it up because it certainly seemed like a comment that was living rent-free in Gage's head for this past week. But, at least for this this quarter, the first quarter, Anthony Richardson was playing pretty good football. I mean, I think it was also not just him. It was everybody. I mean, actually, if you look statistically, their entire offense pretty much was the first quarter because the Broncos basically clamped them after that first quarter. But Gage, there was a comment I made, what was it, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, talking about, the Anthony Richardson benching and then, him possibly being the Jamarcus Russell, if you will, or worse than Jamarcus Russell. So kind of coming, full circle, I will say, like, after that first quarter, there were some atrocious plays. I mean, we've seen some bad quarterback play, Glenn and Gage. We've seen some really bad quarterback play. I don't think I've ever seen a game where it's been that bad of quarterback play.
Yeah, right. I agree. Like, just Anthony Richardson gives you such Tim Tebow vibes. And like Glenn said, or like Cam said, throughout the week, my brain was just playing this scenario over in my head that Cam's comments would come back to haunt us and Anthony Richardson would be dealing in that game. And it looked like in the first quarter, that's exactly what was going to happen. I mean, he came out and threw a couple of piss missiles. I mean, one throw he made between 2 defenders, that's almost comparable to that Bo Nix throw against Atlanta. It really is. So Anthony Richardson had a couple of nice plays in there, but he kind of did what I call the reverse Tim Tebow, where he came out strong in the first quarter, and then it was all downhill from there, and he played some of his worst football in the fourth quarter. So I think a more accurate comp at this point for Anthony Richardson would be Tim Tebow, but a reverse Tim Tebow. Yeah, man, give credit in the beginning of that game to Anthony Richardson, but also the Colts. I thought that Shane Steichen was calling a really good game there in that first quarter. He was really taking advantage of some of the Broncos' weaknesses. He lined up on a quarterback sneak on 3rd down and short or 4th down and short. I can't remember what it was. It looked like Richardson was going to sneak it. He had his foot like extended out like he was going to push off to sneak off of that foot. And then they pitched it to the running back, and the running back ended up picking up the first down. I thought Shane Steichen called a really good game, but ultimately the Broncos were kind of able to weather the storm a little bit there in those first 3.5 quarters. And then once Jonathan Taylor made that egregious mental error, everything started to fall in favor of the Broncos. Taking those points off of the board there for Indianapolis was so huge. Even though Denver went 3 and out after that possession, and it still took them a little bit of time to get in rhythm, that was such a momentum-shifting play, and we wouldn't be sitting here talking about a win if that play had never happened.
Yeah. So, guys, I kept the comment from Charity Strawberries up here. Peyton needs to play Estime from here on out. So even though the Broncos ended up in what turned out to be a blowout victory, another problematic running game. Bo Nix was the leading rusher, I believe, at 23 yards. It's really a miracle that thank goodness the defense is putting some points on the board, but it's a real miracle that we're able to push the ball down when there's really such a lackluster running game. I mean, I have the stats here, and Javonte Williams is the leading rusher. We're 14 games in, 461 yards.
Yeah, and the Broncos are actually 1-3 when Bo Nix is the leading rusher. And funny enough, that was the first game that the Broncos won against the Colts where he was the leading rusher and they won the game, right? And then so much so that like he, in terms of the offense, he accumulates for about 70% of the offense. So I mean, like it's wild, and it goes to show you. There's a lot of ways to kind of skin it, but it goes to show you also too about how impressive this team has been, that they are 9-5 on the brink of possibly clinching a playoff berth, and they have zero running game, and they are relying heavily on Bo Nix to be controlled, for their offense. I mean, shout out to Boggins who put this tweet out, but he's like 5th in passing attempts, on the season. So goes to show you that it's a really bad running game, and they absolutely trust Bo Nix to throw the football. But in just the correlation of the running game, it's just wild now that we are officially at week 15 now, week 16, if you will. And yeah, I mean, I think that the good news is in terms of the estimate point, he's fresh, but we know that we've seen this before where Sean Payton has kind of brought him up a little bit where we need to play Estime more. We need to have him, get some more carries. Well, you did it once, Sean. you did it in the Kansas City game. So let's do it some more. Like, where is this? So I mean, like, I think we're kind of scratching at the surface of, can we please see Estime a little bit more? And yeah, that's kind of like where I'm at too. Is like, we need to see Estime just a little bit more.
Well, I do think that in theory that would help. Based on the language coming out of Dove Valley right now, Benjamin Albright, he's very connected in there, obviously, and he is continuing to hammer home the point. They do not trust Audric Estime in pass protection, and that is a big reason why they are not playing him. Now, on early downs, that's not much of an excuse for me because you should be trying to establish your run game on early downs. You shouldn't be one-dimensional, of course, but not getting Estime the ball on first and second down is borderline inexcusable, in my opinion. I can understand putting Javonte out there in the Samaje Perine role on third down because that's what he can do now. But as far as Estime is concerned, until this team gains some higher level of trust in him, I don't think we're going to see him on a consistent basis. I think they trust Jaleel McLaughlin in a lot of different areas a lot more than they trust Audric Estime. And it was unfortunate because in this Colts game, Estime could have probably really helped you out. There were situations where it was 3rd down and 1, and Sean Payton wasn't comfortable in his run game to get 1 yard. That's ridiculous. I feel like you could have used Estime in a situation like that, but it doesn't matter until they finally figure out who's going to be RB1 for this team long term. The run game is just going to continue to be piss poor.
So Sports Nonsense Gauge is asking about Bidet coming back. What have you heard?
Nothing. Absolutely
Same.
nothing. I mean, his name hasn't really come up at all in conversations ever since he got injured. So I don't think that we're going to see Tyler Bidet back this season.
And what about Jaleel with the quad injury? What's the latest on him?
I haven't heard much. I do know that, Kliss put out a tweet regarding everybody that mentioned that everybody was a participant in walkthrough, or everything was the first time that Moss really partaked in that sort of activity since his injury, and that's not just a Moss thing, but it's all the above. So I think that's certainly a good sign going forward. I'm not saying that we're going to get to that point, but are we at the point where we're kind of clamoring for Blake Watson, just a little bit, considering he's on the practice squad a little bit, and seeing what he has, I think it's just the unfortunate nature of where we are, where it's like you have to roll with the players that you have. You're 9-5 for a reason, so you may as well kind of roll with the punches and roll with the team that you have at hand. But I admittedly will say this, and I was talking to some guys, some friends about this too. I do wonder if Sean Payton, is admittedly kind of hiding Estime just a little bit, or because we all know that a running back, is a bit tiresome depending on the lack of touches, if you will. You know what I mean, like the tread on the tires. So I wonder if maybe they're kind of being a little bit careful with him, and then come next year, of course, I say this, of course, next year when it's a deep running back class, and et cetera, et cetera. But maybe come next year, they pull a fast one on us, and they just say, you know what, you will be our running back one next year, and then at that point, that's when you can, have your fresh legs in a full season, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, think about the Broncos running back room at the time that Estime was drafted. You had Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine. Both of them were in contract years. So maybe the thought process was Audric Estime would sit on the bench year one, Samaje and Javonte would duke it out. And then in year two, when both of those guys are guaranteed to be gone, that's when you can unleash Audric Estime to the world.
Because I think it's safe to say that Javonte Williams, this is his last year in Denver. I can't think of any other circumstance where they would bring him back, even on a minimum contract. I just can't see that happen.
Yeah, 1,000%.
So, the wide receivers didn't play particularly well either. Cortland Sutton, with the exception of that redemption touchdown at the end, he dropped a lot of balls. What was your take on Court this effort and his efforts?
It wasn't actually just him; it was everybody. I will say, because I saw some people kind of hating on Franklin just a little bit. He did have the huge drop that was a screenplay, but the one that was the touchdown was more about a great play by the defender than than Troy Franklin. But yeah, the screenplay, he probably could have caught. But, Vele, had a drop, which was a bit surprising. Sutton, the one play I will say that I actually give a little bit more blame to Bo was the low pass, where Cortland had to kind of dig underneath and catch the pass. If the pass was just a little bit higher, Cortland would have been able to catch that ball. But I mean, all in all, I just thought it was a pretty inconsistent game all the way around. Mm-hmm. Funny enough, it's kind of funny, Glenn and Gage, that the group that we trusted the most in this game was the tight end room. And,
right.
It's funny. It's funny. We've really not talked about him much. But I do think he kind of has carved himself out to, a role on this football team, not as tight end one, but I do think we're starting to kind of see some relationship brewing between Adam Troutman and Bo Nix just a little bit, specifically on those seam plays and those nice little zip throws that are short, to either Lucas Kroll or Troutman. But the tight end position is kind of flying under the radar just a little bit in terms of the comfortability with Bo.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And with how much cover 3 the Colts play with Gus Bradley, I was going to be pissed if we didn't see at least one shot down the seam with the tight end. And we saw it in a big moment. Obviously, it was the first points on the board for the Denver Broncos. That was huge. So Adam Troutman's a guy that I've harped on quite a bit over this past year. I don't think that he is a tight end one in the NFL, but I do think that he's kind of a solid lunch pail tight end 2 type of guy that does the dirty work, that doesn't really get appreciated too much. I think that he'd be an excellent mentor for a rookie tight end that the Denver Broncos hopefully bring in next year. So I do think that there is a role here for Adam Troutman, as well as Nate Atkins, another guy in the tight end position that's starting to make some plays here for the Denver Broncos. He caught a touchdown in this game. Looks like he's starting to develop some chemistry with Bo Nix. So there are some good pieces in this tight end room. There's just not a clear-cut alpha number one guy.
And Atkins even had that tremendous spin move to barrel himself into the end zone. That was, he's a pod favorite. We all we're big fans of him coming into the season, and so it's great to see him contributing 3 touchdowns already this season. So that's great. And I do want to mention, I did say that Cortland had a rough game, but he did score that touchdown.
Yeah.
The double move on that route was spectacular. So forget about just the catch in the end zone and being wide open. His way of getting into the end zone was pretty spectacular.
Yeah. Well, and it actually happened twice.
Double move.
Yeah, it happened twice actually. One resulted in the pass interference penalty that actually got them into the end zone. I think that was the Troutman touchdown. But yeah, so it was pretty obvious that the defensive backs, for the Colts, couldn't stop that double move. And I think that just over the course of the game, from the passing side of things, you started to kind of see things finally unfold. Specifically into that second half with Bo, and with those turnovers. Obviously, he had the worst first half of his of the season, frankly, since the Seattle game. But I think that the mark of a good quarterback is also how you respond. And this is also the mark of a good playoff team as well, is when you respond with how well your quarterback plays as well. And so I think that for the way that they responded and rallied around Bo, and Bo rallying himself out of a situation, I think needs to be talked a lot in terms of this situation. No, he didn't play great in those the 2.5 quarters or whatever, but it was such a weird game in the sense that he still put points up on the board. He was still good enough in the sense of putting drives together after turnovers, or flipping field position, and successfully putting them in just point after point after point. So I think that, despite the fact that he was making some pretty awful decisions, when he started turning things around, I think he started getting more and more comfortable. And I think it kind of goes back to what I talked about in the beginning, where it looked like he was a bit, the nerves were there. Excuse me. The nerves were there in the beginning. And I think once he kind of settled down, it did take a bit. Once he kind of settled down, you started to kind of see that Bo Nix that we've been very accustomed to seeing.
Yeah.
And that's go ahead.
What I was going to say is, and we've mentioned it before, that the guy does not get rattled. He doesn't crump out. And as Cam was just referencing, this was his worst start to any game this season. 2 of those interceptions were just horrendously bad. I mean, these, like Cam Parker in a flag football game could have caught probably both. Definitely one. The second one maybe in the face, but one definitely. But this guy, we have found a quarterback that's 24 years old and does not get down on himself, does not see ghosts, does not just fall into this abyss and get himself deeper. He brushes it off, and he's wise as far as from a poised standpoint beyond his years, and that's one thing that even with that start you had to feel pretty good, because he wasn't giving up, and his teammates didn't need to prop him up on the sideline.
Mm-hmm.
I always had that feeling in this game that Bo Nix was going to find some way to dig us out of the shit. He even almost dug us out of the shit in Seattle when he had probably his worst game of his career. This would be his second worst game of his career, for me at least. And he threw for 3 touchdowns, and the Broncos won 31-13. So the fact that we're talking about Bo Nix having such a bad game, and the Broncos still found a way to blow out their opponent, and Bo still managed to find a way to throw 3 touchdowns in that game. The most recent point of reference that we have here in Broncos country for young quarterbacks is Drew Lock. And you think of some of Drew Lock's multi-turnover games where he just got worse and worse as the game went on. That Kansas City game in the snow, that Raiders game where he threw 4 interceptions and just continued to look worse and worse and worse. Bo Nix has this ability to flush out those bad plays. And I call it the FICO brain. F it, carry on. Yes, you made a bad play. Yes, it happened, but you've got to focus on getting the next completion. You'll worry about fixing that stuff tomorrow in the film room. You'll worry about fixing that stuff in practice. You've just got to go out there and play the game. You've got to stay dialed in. You've got to stay focused, and don't get too high and don't get too low. Bo Nix talked about that in his post-game presser, how it's hard, just as human nature, it's hard to do that sometimes, but you've got to find a way to do it if you're going to survive as an NFL quarterback.
Yeah. Well, and I just think that, you touched on it in correlation to like the past quarterbacks. And Drew Lock is the best example. Or just any of the quarterbacks post Peyton Manning, for example, because it's like, I think that if you look at it from just their perspective, like the moment they would have really positive plays, but then one play or two plays or even three plays, right? Like, it would then snowball. And then because it would snowball, the entire game from their perspective would snowball, and it would be just a very terrible game. And I think that, we can definitely, make the case that the coaching has been terrible, which it has over the course of 8 years. And the quarterback play has been really terrible over the course of 8 years. But as we've seen and as we've discussed, it's also about how the players have been able to rally around their quarterback. And so the fact that we have had a quarterback be resilient and throw these 3 interceptions, but then also put forth a better performance that still allows you to win the game by over 18 points is now an attribute to the complete opposite, right? To what we're saying. It's the complete opposite of, oh, wow, we have the resilient quarterback. Wow, look at Sean Payton. He really might be the coach of the year, and he probably should be the coach of the year with the job that he's been able to do and how stubborn he was and turning Bo Nix and everything. So, I mean, like, it's just, yeah, it is absolutely a trend in the right direction. And the fact that this was, the biggest game that we have ever seen at Empower Field since that AFC Championship game, and that's the game we turn out with from the quarterback side of things, defensive side of things, that is a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, and David points out 8 years and how many QBs and a rookie got us a winning season. And guys, bear with me with my voice and my coughing. I'm sorry about that. Little rough day.
It's man flu season out there.
Yeah. So, Jeff Bryan says he was at the game, traveled from Maine to go see. I walked by Osweiler in the tunnel before the game. I have no idea how he took the hits in the NFL. Tallest skinny human being ever seen in person. Yeah, it's nice to see Brock actually back as part of the Broncos family, considering how he left kind of in a pissy fashion, even though he did catch it. But again, it just lends to the fact that the former players are very important to this current ownership group. And it's very, very cool that they continue to bring back guys. I think Louis Wright was part of the pregame festivities as well. I mean, it's Ring of Famer from the Orange Crush days, so it's pretty cool.
And I think what's great with Brock too is it at least scheduling wise, they hit it at a pretty good time for Brock because as I found out in the last couple of years, apparently he's a college football color commentator, so they hit it at a really good point in the season with the bowl season getting ready to kick up. What is it, this upcoming weekend? So they hit it at a pretty good time to kind of reach back out to him and bring him in.
Well, just how crazy it is that this was the most important Broncos game since Super Bowl 50, and both of the Super Bowl 50 quarterbacks were in the house to see it.
And they were standing on the Broncos sideline. One quarterback, I should say, was standing, in particular, was standing on the Broncos sideline, not the Colts sideline.
And what can you give us a hint?
That would be the GOAT himself, Peyton Manning.
Peyton F. Manning.
Yeah, baby.
So, all right, guys. So we go into halftime. First half has been a little suspect, but come back out and tell me a little bit about just the feel at the beginning of the third quarter early on.
Gage, I don't know about you. It was a bit it felt like, surely that dam was going to break here eventually. And then they go out and, then things started to kind of really unfold in a way that, the Indianapolis Colts became the Broncos of the last 8 years, where they were just giving you the opportunity to win this football game. And the Broncos offense kind of sputtered just a little bit. And then, the Broncos kicked a field goal. Then another possible turnover situation happened. And then the other thing that really is the mark of a really good playoff team, Gage, is this, the special teams. Special teams, special players, special plays, special players. That would be Marvin Mims. And Marvin Mims was probably the MVP of this entire game. And I think to kind of call back to, maybe, was it the second quarter where he did kind of like the brief, like, fair catches, try and see if the refs were going to, see it. And they did. But, he had really special runs that set them up into, scoring situations. And the fact that they were able to at least capitalize on a vast majority of them was massive. So huge kudos to him. But yeah, the Colts were really just kind of setting them up to basically win this game.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously you come out there in the second half, and first drive out of the halftime, Bo Nix throws his second interception of the game. You're just feeling kind of down and deflated at that point. You thought that drive coming out of halftime was going to be the drive that the Broncos finally put something together, and it ended in that horrible, heartbreaking fashion. And obviously the morale in the stadium just deflated at that point. But slowly but surely, the Broncos found more and more opportunities there. They had that fumble. I'm trying to remember, was the fumble that PJ Locke forced in the first or the second half?
It was second half, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Oh
so
gosh,
that was obviously a big part of it. And then Marvin Mims then had that big return that set up a touchdown. And then Nick Bonito had his flying fumble recovery for a touchdown that looked like a pick six in real time. But since it was a behind the line pass, it goes as a fumble recovery. Those were the real big plays that shifted the momentum of this game. And just like I said in my post-game stream, good teams find a way to make big plays in big moments. And that's what the Broncos have done consistently throughout the course of this year. They did get an assist from Jonathan Taylor on this one, but none of the plays that the Broncos made afterwards would have been possible if that one hadn't have happened. But regardless, the Broncos, they took advantage when they needed to.
One of my favorite Twitter pages is Mile High Moments. And I particularly love the fact that because they do show so many players in history and so many games. I love it. And he this was a previous post that he retweeted, and he had a side-by-side of Rick Upchurch and Marvin Mims Jr. And they bore a very striking resemblance. And the fact that Rick Upchurch is a legendary kick and punt returner, not only in Broncos history, but in NFL history, with a ton of touchdowns, player of the decade, or, on the all-decade teams, I think for two decades in a row. And here he is side by side with Marvin Mims Jr. Boy, if we can get that kind of production on from Mims, or even a portion of it moving forward, that would be spectacular. But that was an awesome tweet, the side by side. If you get a chance to check out Mile High Moments, check it out.
Just to briefly butt in, the Denver Broncos have finally released their injury report for today. It was super duper late, but it came out about 3 minutes ago. The only DNP on the report was John Franklin Myers with his foot injury. Jaleel McLaughlin got a limited practice in, or would have if it were an actual full practice. They only held a walkthrough today. Riley Moss limited, DJ Jones limited, Pat Surtain full.
Oh, that's huge news on Surtain.
Back-to-back days, should we say, for Surtain too.
He's good to go.
Well, I mean, the Chargers thought for a minute there they were going to not have to deal with Surtain for a second, for a second game in a row. But it doesn't look like they've lucked out in that fashion.
I mean, you might as well give Surtain a stake in Chargers ownership at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, update the Wikipedia page, right?
Right.
Yep.
The Chargers daddy, right? Gotta put it there. But as Jeff puts into the comments about the play that really just put the entire stadium into a frenzy was, that pick six, if you will, or the right, or the fumble recovery, or whatever you want to call it. I think it's a picks. This pick six. But just I don't know where you were sitting, Gage, but with me sitting in the 135 area, seeing the way things were transpiring on that play, and to see Benito break on that ball, it was like something, like you're watching the play from that last week against the Cleveland Browns. Like, that was an Ed Reed, pun intended, based on everything that's going on, right? With what A.D. Mitchell, talked about. But he turned into Ed Reed on the play. Made a defensive player of the year type of a moment once again, and he really asserted himself into that conversation. And frankly, you could argue may have won it based on that actual play itself.
Yep. I mean, I was up in 527 on the east side, so it happened basically right in front of me. It was insane. Oh, official news. Falcons are going to Michael Penix Jr. But anyway, I was up in that east side area, so it was literally right in front of me. You could see the whole play unfold. You realized it was going to be a double pass, and as it was hanging up in the air, you could see just this flash of orange that was coming downhill and met him right at where that ball was hitting Anthony Richardson, and he took it to the house. You just couldn't believe it, man. And once you looked down and saw it was number 15, I was like, no way, no effing way. That's what I just kept telling the guy who I was next to. No effing way, man.
That's awesome. I guess you can, based on how he entered the end zone, you could say that play was nuts.
Yeah.
But
Charity
with another comment. I'm starting to feel like this defense is a Super Bowl 50 defense.
I mean, it seems a bit lofty, but with the way that they're able to make opportune moments and, big, plays in key moments, it could necessarily rival, that. But, Glad, take us through, your emotions watching it from the broadcast view. Because, I feel like, this is like one of those rare moments where the broadcast view might actually be just a tad bit better than the actual game view. Because obviously they give us the side view in terms of the broadcast view,
right.
So just to see that, where you're looking at it, and then all of a sudden Nick Benito just comes across your screen and literally picks off that pass.
I mean, first of all, like when Mitchell was kind of like having a little tough time handling the ball, I was a bit surprised that he did still throw it. But one of the things that has not been really talked about was Pat Surtain's role in that play, because he came charging was leaping up at AD and did not get a hand on the ball, but just obviously had some effect on that. But Benito's catch on that pass, I mean, that was not an easy play, and it was seamless, and he just hauled ass. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, it's a fumble recovery, like interception, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I call it an absolute game changer. And if you've gotten a chance to see any of now some of the mic'd up footage that came out today too with PS2, like all he was saying was, "Oh my God, oh my God," and then they're on the sideline and they're chanting Benito, like Jonah Ellis was.
Yeah.
It was so funny, and like Nick was almost like embarrassed and like got up and walked away. But I mean, wow, this is and then you see the clip of from the draft, and George Payton's like Nick Benito at 64. Oh my God, like holy shit, I think is what he said. It's like
right.
It's this guy is playing at a worldly level, and when you start seeing some of the other players that have in comparison to the sacks with 2 touchdowns on the defense in a single season. And I don't think he's finished. I mean, there are 3 more games. There's a lot that can happen.
There's a lot that certainly happened. By the way, I was pulling through some of these grades, if you will, through Pro Football Focus, and I know that the grades are pretty blah, and we know that certainly in the beginning part of the season and even during this season, they obviously clearly hate Zach Allen and everything, and they clearly have hated before the season that Denver Broncos defensive line. Ranking them 31st in the league. Anyway, but over the last 4 games, over the last 4 games, Nick Bonito has an 86.4 defensive grade, which is, the 5 sacks, 2 hits, which by the way, I find hilarious because he's gotten 5 sacks. So how could he have 5 sacks if he only has like 2 QB hits? I digress. And he's got 9 hurries. But what I find very hilarious, by the way, is that over the course of his 4 games, Bonito has a coverage grade of 89. Jesus. That's like better than, possibly like a Jaquan McMillan, maybe even a Riley Moss. Like, obviously they probably, factor in the touchdowns and stuff like it in there. So like just the fact that like we have a edge rusher who is clearly, playing at such a high level from that side of things, it's staggering. And, and I think that what people need to remember too is like when he was at Oklahoma, this isn't the first time that he's been dropped into coverage either. You know what I mean? Like he's been used as this QB spy, this player that, has been used as almost like a rover at times, on that defensive front. So I don't want to say it's too surprising, but to see the impact that's clearly made where they've been able to use him in just so many creative ways has been just unbelievable.
Yeah.
We look at the Chiefs game this year where he was basically being used as that rover QB spy on Patrick Mahomes. They lined him up as zero technique and they had him drop back and spy Patrick Mahomes. That was insane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That was crazy. I am here. I am alive.
We're shaking shots. So in the comments, I see a reference to Chris Abrams-Drain. What do you guys think of his performance?
Phenomenal, actually, but super, super phenomenal. I was certainly questioning the decision when they were, in that Browns game in the sense of really just throwing him into the fire. 4 minutes left into the game. He played well, but it's like I would have made that decision a lot earlier. And I think, it was kind of interesting. We were all certainly speculating the biggest news of the day, maybe not, them actually facing the Colts, but will Levi Wallace, be on, any of these wide receivers? Well, the biggest news, of it was Levi Wallace was inactive, which probably means it could be at the time with the Denver Broncos being out, maybe short-lived, if you will. But Abrams-Drain played really, really well. And I find this tidbit just a little bit interesting in regards to Abrams-Drain that I didn't really know. When he was at Missouri, he was a former wide receiver, turned corner. So clearly when you have, and we clearly have now found that with the Heisman Trophy winner, Travis Hunter, by the way, there's just, it's just pretty obvious that when you have either played the position of wide receiver or you played the position of corner, making the transition to wide receiver, you take different lessons from either of those situations. And it's clear that it has helped translate him into a pretty solid corner. So now you possibly, I don't mean to overreact, but it's like you possibly enter Abrams-Drain into this mix now as a third corner along with Jaquan McMillan and, Riley Moss when he comes back, like the way he played in this game was, you could not have asked for a better start, specifically with, these wide receivers, because they are big wide receivers. Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman. Josh Downs isn't a big receiver, but A.D. Mitchell, they had some pretty tall receivers and it looked like he handled them quite well.
We talk about Alec Pierce. The Colts tried to hit a double move with Alec Pierce on Chris Abrams-Drain right before halftime, and Cad did not bite on it at all. He stayed with Pierce hip for hip. And then when they finally got in the end zone, the ball was kind of hanging up there a little bit from Anthony Richardson. But once they finally got in the end zone, Cad did such a good job of turning his head and getting in position to make a play on the ball so he wouldn't get flagged for pass interference. That was textbook coverage from him. He had a really nice play, 4th down and 6. The Colts were down 24-13, so that was basically their last gasp. He had a play where he flipped his hips and broke on the ball and broke it up. It was fantastic. I thought that he made some really sound fundamental plays just technique-wise, and that was one of the biggest things that I liked about him coming out of the draft was that I thought that he had really solid fundamental technique. He wasn't getting his hips turned when he shouldn't get them turned. He'd be able to stick with receivers whenever they'd hit him with double moves. Something like that really caught my eye with Chris Abrams-Draine when he was coming out of college, and all of those traits showed out on Sunday. And now with Cam's comment saying that he was a former wide receiver, that makes total sense. The way that he was able to make a play on that ball there, on that Alec Pierce play, and then on that 4th down and 6 play. I can't remember who the receiver was. It might have been Adonai Mitchell, but it was a fantastic job from him. And hearing now that he was a former receiver, that makes complete and total sense.
Yeah. So we also heard in the last 24 hours some other news where the Broncos have now, their game against Cincinnati is now going to be the Saturday afternoon national game. So this team went from being box office poison as far as national games earlier on the season to now they're actually making changes to the schedules to accommodate the Broncos being in prime time or in the afternoon nationally. What's your feeling on that? And do you think, how do you think that benefits Denver?
We'll see. Kind of makes it a bit interesting. I mean, you're going to have basically another primetime game, right? Another one against the Colts here, against the Chargers here on Thursday, which is, another Thursday night game, which we should probably put the full disclosure. If they win that game, they punch their ticket into the playoffs. But, they got the primetime game against the Cincinnati Bengals, which I'm actually looking forward to that game. It's going to be a very fascinating game because I think that is one where we might see the second time all season, maybe third time all season, where Pat Surtain follows one target the entire game. And that would be basically him on Jamar Chase the entire time. And of course, when I say the second, might actually end up being maybe he just follows Ladd McConkey, this Thursday night. I'm very curious to see what it's going to all unfold. Joe Burrow against Bo Nix, where people have made some comparisons on the timeline about, Joe Burrow and Bo Nix. So it's gonna be a fun one. And I'm kind of curious to see how it all unfolds. I am thankful though, and obviously we know that Christmas does not fall on a weekend. I am very thankful that the Denver Broncos do not have a Christmas game.
Yeah. Seriously, Christmas games have not been kind to the Denver Broncos over the past couple of years, but it's going to be interesting to see how much the Broncos actually have to play for in this Bengals game. If they take care of business this Thursday against the Chargers, then they will have already had their playoff spot locked up. If we get halfway through this game and the Broncos have a comfortable lead, or even if the Bengals have a comfortable lead, we might see the Broncos pull their starters because they might not have much to play for by that point in time. The Broncos might have already taken care of their business, and we've got this Steelers and Ravens game coming up here, and that's going to be the game I think that determines if Denver can get up to the number 5 seed. If the Ravens lose this game, then Denver's got a legitimate shot to get up to the number 5 seed. If the Steelers were to win this game, or if the Ravens were to win this game, then it might be a little bit more challenging. So I was looking through some of the scenarios there. It looks a little bit more like the Denver Broncos are probably going to end up in the 6th seed. If you take care of business against the Chargers and you've already got the game decided at halftime against the Bengals, pull your starters. You're not going to improve your seeding anymore. Sit your starters against the Chiefs and get ready for the playoffs.
And that was one of the interesting things with that second half as well, was while the Broncos were starting to pull away, the Chargers completely fell apart against
Yep.
Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers to the point where they are now the 7th seed. The Broncos are presently the 6th seed, with the Ravens, like you referenced, to be in the 5th seed as far as the wild card standings are concerned. So if the season ended right now, we would be playing Russell Wilson in the playoffs, but which is another thing. But
and that's another chariot that kind of turned back into a pumpkin this past Sunday. Russell Wilson and the Steelers kind of laid an egg in Philadelphia.
they
It was
sure
good.
did.
It was a tough opponent, but they sure laid an egg.
And I haven't seen if TJ Watt's been practicing since then, but
He's going to be sidelined for quite a while from what I saw.
that's what I thought too. But you just never know with these Watt boys.
That's actually big news for the Broncos in a couple of different areas, because obviously the Steelers and their opponents and stuff, if the Steelers can potentially finish with that 3 seed, Denver will be playing them. But obviously the defensive player of the year conversation here, if TJ Watt can't go in the final 3 weeks, Nick Benito might be able to close that gap.
And or Surtain.
Or
And
Surtain.
Jeff mentions the Chargers legit could choke away the playoffs. I mean, that would be
Charger. And you know what? It all started when Justin Herbert cut his hair. He cut his hair. He got rid of all of his aura. The Chargers are going to lose out now.
That's why Gage still has aura. He's got all those luscious locks. Jeff also predicting that the Steelers will lose out. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that if the Broncos win out, my 12-5 prediction comes true, which would be an absolute miracle based on how the season started.
But what's crazy too is if they end up at 12-5 too, there's a real chance they might not even be the 6th seed either. They could actually end up being the 5th seed, which at that point you're possibly talking about the Houston Texans and Denver Broncos matchup, which frankly that would actually might be just a little bit favorable in regards to the Broncos with kind of how the Houston Texans have been as far as being a Jekyll and Hyde team.
And just think about the Texans last year. That was kind of the beginning of the end game for Denver last year, was that Texans game. Imagine if it all comes full circle and you're able to get that playoff game against none other than the Texans.
Yeah, I mean, with Russ throwing that interception to basically that killed the Broncos' opportunity to come back and win that. But you're right, Cam. The Texans have not been playing very well lately, and they have a very favorable division to win, so that's to their benefit. But against poor teams, they are not pulling away. In fact, it's either been losses recently or very, very close victories.
We probably should give them a huge thank you though for beating the Miami Dolphins this last weekend though.
Right.
Because of that, it obviously helped afford the Broncos to be above 90% in getting to the playoffs. But I just to go back to the Colts game a little bit as we talk about those playoffs. It's just it goes to show you how important this game was. And I do think from the young team mental side of things, winning that kind of game, I think does a lot for their confidence going into a divisional game on Thursday night, because, it means that you've, for all intents and purposes, have had a playoff game before your divisional game. And you didn't play up to snuff, right? As we said, and you won by 18. So the fact that, you have that game and you can very quickly do what you did, if you did against the New Orleans Saints, right? And just basically just try your best and just wax poetic if you can, a divisional rival, and win your game. I mean, against, 70% Bronco fans and 100 Charger fans. I mean, it's going to be glorious when the Broncos are going to be able to clinch the playoff berth in SoFi.
Yep. I mean, you'd be basically in front of a home crowd doing it. Broncos country is going to come with the same energy that they came with at home against Indianapolis. It's going to be a lot of crowd noise that the Chargers are going to have to deal with. They're probably going to have to use a silent snap count at home. That just goes to show how much of a presence there is of Broncos country out there in Southern California. And just to think that this Broncos team has a chance to basically clinch their playoff berth in front of home fans like that is awesome.
Sean Payton actually referenced that they're going to be doing a silent count. He goes, which is good for us.
Yeah,
so
it is.
He's getting cockier and cockier, and I'm here for it. It's like,
well, and I think that to do a little bit of a some more Bo Nix, Sean Payton talk just a little bit. It goes to show you just how comfortable he's finally getting. Now that he's got his quarterback, and now he can kind of start to be even without a running game, but he could start to be a little bit more creative in how he wants to do certain play calls. And you're starting to even see it with Bo. Like you're starting to see with Bo. The one thing obviously was a bit unfortunate was, he was not gun shy, right? Or he was gun shy, against the Indianapolis Colts. And, you want to make sure that he brings out that aggressive nature a little bit against the, Los Angeles Chargers. And I will say, I do think that the fact that they have, for a young quarterback, at least played them once, at least gives them the opportunity for a young quarterback to learn and see those adjustments going into the game. So I think that the fact he had that game and then going up against this one, I think is a good thing for his confidence, and he can kind of, play it much, much better, if you will. But yeah, it's great to see a head coach and a quarterback finally actually truly be the symbiotic relationship of, one another and playing really well.
And I think it's a good time to bring up that Chargers game in week 6 where the Broncos legitimately walked into a trap game. They were coming off of that blowout win the week prior against the Raiders. They had that big emotional game of Sean Payton returning to New Orleans on that short week on Thursday night. The entire game plan for the Broncos defensively basically went out the window once Pat Surtain got injured basically on the first defensive snap of the game. That was right after the Broncos had turned the ball over offensively, and it just felt like the game got away from Denver before they could really get into a rhythm. This time, the Broncos are going to be a lot more prepared for it. The stakes are going to be so much higher. The Broncos know that playoffs are on the line with this game.
Right.
So I don't think they're going to come out unprepared, and I think they're going to be ready to get punched in the mouth early in this game. I don't think they were ready for it in that week 6 game.
I think that is a very fair assessment of exactly what happened. And the fact that we are going to have such a tremendous amount of fans in that stadium, it's got to be so discouraging for the Chargers to look around and see literally every home game is a halvesy game. I mean, we could call it Empower West or whatever Mile High West. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But it is going to be there's going to be a lot of orange. I mean, the fact that Bo Nix is even talking about, he's expecting to see a lot of orange. It's should be very, very interesting. And the fact that the Broncos agreed to go, have a shortened week to take that opportunity says really what the confidence level of the coaches in these players. I'm sorry, guys. But I mean, we're holding once again our destiny in our own hands, and I don't think I could think of a better opponent to be facing, with that at stake.
And it goes to show you, I think, just not to brag too much about the NFL script, if you will, but it goes to show you just how phenomenal this season was in terms of setting up this Broncos year for the playoffs. Because, and it's one of the reasons why that Indianapolis Colts game was so massive. If they won that game, they, for the most part, controlled their destiny for the entirety of their play. I mean, they already controlled their destiny, but they controlled their destiny once they got rid of that game, because basically every team that is behind them, except for the Chargers, basically, but every team that was basically behind them, the Dolphins, the Bengals, the Colts, they basically have to, you forced all those teams to win out. You forced all those teams to win out. And the Colts may have a favorable schedule, but you still forced, that team, the Bengals, and and even the Dolphins to win out. And it's going to be really hard to do. It's going to be super hard, for them to do. And obviously the Colts have a divisional opponent against the Titans. It's going to be a very interesting, game. Obviously, Will Levis is not going to be in there. It's going to be Mason Rudolph probably. So it's all shaping. It is all shaped up really well for the Broncos, and I think that it's just you could not have asked for a perfect season, and the fact that it's shaping out to where this team has just exceeded expectations is just been impressive.
Yeah. It's not been a good week for Mayo. Gerard is on the hot seat here in New England, and Will Levis gets benched. So,
True.
Yeah.
I mean,
anyways, go ahead, Gage.
with what's going on in New England right now, obviously, Glenn, you're up there. You have kind of a unique perspective, but what is kind of the temperature in terms of Gerard Mayo's seat right now? Do you think that Robert Kraft is going to be impatient and fire him after 1 year? Do you think they're going to kind of see this operation through?
I'd be surprised because he was the guy that they picked probably 5 years ago to be Belichick's successor. So, and he was a Kraft favorite as a player and did well in the coaching ranks. It really earned the job, but I can't imagine that he's going to be a one and done considering how poor the surrounding cast is. And Drake May really is showing a lot of spark and potential. So I anticipate he'll get one more year. I'd be really surprised if it's a one and done.
Yeah. But yeah, it should be interesting. In terms of the coaches, I see Jeff Bryant mention AP. It's gonna be interesting.
Alex Van Pelt is gone. He'll be gone. So
yeah. But yeah, I think so. Looking at this Charge game, we briefly mentioned about some of the matchups a little bit, but where are you guys at in terms of some of these matchups going forward? Obviously, probably don't need to look no further, than Pat Surtain being on Ladd McConkey. I think, I do think the J.K. Dobbins injury is huge for the Chargers, but I also know that this is Jim Harbaugh we're talking about, or a Harbaugh, if you will. So it's kind of from that Shanahan-esque style where they could just roll in any running back and they're going to be rather successful. So the defensive line got to still, maintain their gap integrity, fill those lanes and stop the running game, of Gus Edwards and Vidal. But what are some matchups, and we'll just, for you, Glenn, like, that you would feel like going into the Chargers game?
I mean, I think one of the major matchups is the Broncos defensive line against Justin Herbert. He's been injury riddled a little bit this year, and I think he's one of those guys that they're going to be able to catch. He's got some running skills, but I feel like the Broncos are really going to be able to get a significant number of sacks. I think 5 to 7 sacks in this game.
5 to 7.
Yeah.
5 to 7. Oh man, I will be celebrating if they end up with that, those 7 sacks.
Yeah, I mean, the Chargers have got one of the best offensive lines in football. So it's definitely going to be a challenge for the Broncos up front, but I do expect them to rise to that challenge. They might be without John Franklin Myers in this game. That's something that bears monitoring. If he can maybe get in a limited practice tomorrow, then I think that we'll be able to get John Franklin Myers for this one. If not, though, we're going to have to see who steps up there because he's somebody who wins a lot of those one-on-one matchups up front that allows Zach Allen to eat. So that might get affected there if we don't have John Franklin Myers. In terms of other matchups that I'm watching, Pat Surtain, if he takes away Ladd McConkey, who's going to get open for this Chargers team? If Riley Moss plays especially, it might be over because they didn't have Ladd McConkey in that Chiefs game, and nobody was getting open for them in that game. It was terrible. I mean, Herbert was dancing around in the pocket and nobody could get open. And now with Herbert's kind of inability to escape the pocket with some of these lower body injuries that we're dealing with, the Broncos, some of those sacks, I could see 5 to 7 sacks, but they might not be sacks in terms of them winning up front the line of scrimmage. They might be more coverage sacks because the Broncos are doing a great job in the secondary and Herbert has literally nowhere to go with the football. So on that side of the ball, that's going to be what I'm watching. But as far as matchups on the other side of the ball, this Chargers defense is so stout against the run. And you think about the Broncos struggling to establish a run game. Will they be able to get something going here against this Chargers defense?
Yeah, but based on this, the history of what showed, that's nothing new to the Broncos. They've had no running game all year, so so I think it's going to end up being how can they keep this chain moving, and I think that one area where specifically from the pass rush side of things to Knicks, if you will, really doing a great job of eliminating those sacks is the screen game. And that's, I think, one part that I think that this Bronco team, and we haven't really touched on it, it was really a non-factor, obviously, last year in terms of the screen game. But in the last, I'd say, half or so weeks, we're really starting to see the screen game be kind of an integral part of this offense. And that is with guys like Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims. They really haven't run a screen yet with Cortland Sutton yet. So I think that, seeing that side of things has been really great to see for this Denver Broncos team. So I think, going forward, can they create a lot of, some of these misdirection plays? Marvin Mims wasn't necessarily a factor offensively, out of the backfield and, as a receiver. He certainly was in the special teams area. So how can they be able to continue to generate touches and generate some action with him? Because obviously in that Chargers game, that was not a wrinkle that the Chargers were prepared for going into that game. Now it is. So that's just going to be one more thing that they're going to be able to be prepared for. So I'm very curious to see how, that's going to be. And then, kind of like, till we touched on in the first game and the first action that they played them, it's kind of the same blend, if you will, of the Mike McDonald defense, right, that they played against Seattle. Well, now will be basically the third time Bo Nix and Sean Payton and Davis Webb and Joe Lombardi have faced them. So what new wrinkles?
Baltimore.
Oh, yeah, Baltimore. So what is going to end up being these new wrinkles we're going to see from the offensive side of things? So I'm very curious to see how all of it unfolds. And I think that there's a good chance the Broncos do come away with this. It's just going to be I use this whenever we talk about like those rough games. This is just going to feel like a true Big Ten type of game, just an ugly defensive game, that's excuse me, that's led by quarterback play, really good decision making, and can you convert in the red zone? That's just kind of like what it means to me. Is like this is going to just be a very rough and tough game.
Right. So why don't we go over what we have for score predictions? Cam, lead us off.
So like I said, I think it's going to be a Big Ten type of style game. So I will say I'm going to say 20-14. I'm going to say 20-14 Broncos. I think they actually do it. And they clinched their first playoff berth since 2015. And all of us in Broncos country are going to be celebrating.
Gage?
So the Broncos have not been swept by the Chargers since 2010. That was Josh McDaniels' times. This team has had the number of the Chargers for the last decade and a half. They have at least found a way, even in all of the bad years that they have had, to beat the Chargers at least one time. And I don't see that changing here in this game. Yes, the Chargers are the best coached unit that they have had in that entire decade and a half timeline. But at the end of the day, this Broncos team has got a playoff berth on the line. They know what's at stake, and Sean Payton has been in these types of games before. He knows how to win these types of games. He was able to keep that team afloat last week when it looked like they were going to lose to Indianapolis, and they found a way to win 31-13. They're going to have to find a way to win the war of attrition. They're going to have to win the battle in the trenches. They're going to have to find a way to establish some resemblance of a run game. They're going to have to keep Bo Nix protected, which they have done very well over these last few weeks. And they're going to have to generate pressure on Justin Herbert. I'm confident in at least 2 of those 3 happening. I'm confident in Bo Nix being protected, and I'm confident in them getting after Justin Herbert. Because of that, I am going to pick Denver to win, but I think it's going to be close. It's going to be a dogfight, just like you said, Cam. I'm going to pick Denver to win 17-14.
Wow. Okay. That that's a little too close for comfort.
Walk-off field goal.
Oh, geez.
So, in terms of the Chargers charging, there is something to be said for that. And I think that team actually reads that and believes it. They understand because it happens. It's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that Jeff Bryant even had referenced the fact that he thinks that the Chargers could play their way out of the 7th seed, which would be pretty telling. And one of the scary parts of that is it could be Cincinnati getting in the 7th seed. But
Yeah.
that being said, like I referenced, the defense is going to have a hell of a game. I think the offense does a fine job and does put some points on the board. This team has been scary, and our team has been surprisingly high scoring throughout this season. You look, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, we're in the high 20s, we're in the 30s. I think the Broncos win this game 27-16, and I think Club Dub is going to be rocking hard.
Man, that will be impressive. Just considering, everything for them to win a game, a divisional game, a clinching game, and win by double digits. That will be impressive. That would be super impressive. And I mean, I would say that that's probably more impressive than, winning the Colts over them by like 18. So if that happens, yeah, I think you would definitely bet that us, every single Bronco podcast, Club Dub, every single member of, Broncos country, will be, definitely excited. Which, by the way, I will mention this fun fact here.
Okay.
So the Broncos had a 5-game winning streak last year, right? They had a 5-game winning streak last year.
Mm-hmm.
It just so happened the 5-game winning streak happened after a loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. What happened this year? They had a loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. And right now they sit with 4 straight wins.
There we go. And another thing, too, the only way that this team doesn't make the playoffs is if they go 0-3. You want to know the last time the Sean Payton-led Broncos went 0-3 during a stretch of a season? His first 3 games as Broncos head coach.
Yep.
Interesting. I mean, it feels like things are really looking bright, and based on historical facts and such. Just the orange-colored glasses that we continue to wear. But this team has been freaking awesome, and it's been a blast to not only watch as a fan, but to now talk about this. And I have to say that the chat has just been increasingly, the participation has been phenomenal over these weeks, and we can't thank you guys enough. I know Cam gets a lot of chats on his mainly podcast. Gage on his Broncos Syndicate page. I see the views. I see the comments. It's you guys were successful before when the team was really sucking wind, and now that the team is on the verge of securing a playoff spot, to see how things are going for both of you guys has been really, really cool. So,
well, and I think that it's a huge shout out to every single member that does Bronco podcasts and and even the fans, because when you look at what all of us have been through, fans, and doing podcasts, I think we've talked about it before. It sucked. Like it has absolutely sucked to try and regurgitate the same content over and over and over again about how can we make poop smell like rosemary every single time with how bad we've been as a franchise lately in the last 8 years. So the fact that the tide is turning and we're actually talking about a playoff team when we all kind of hoped that things were turning in that direction or possibly turning in that direction, it's been a joy. And it's been a joy in the journey being able to do this with you guys on MHRT Network and doing, mainly Broncos and interacting with people on the chat, interacting with people on the X Twitter platform. I mean, I'm just glad that, we are finally at this day. We've been talking about it as, people on, this show, right? But to finally see it unfold is, I don't know. I'm just grateful, very, very grateful, and I'm very humbled.
Cool. I mean, this is my third year of covering the team, and first year was the Russell Wilson year, and that was just a tumultuous experience where you could see as the weeks went on, this fan base checked out.
Yeah.
They were so disengaged with what this team was doing, and it's just a testament to what Sean Payton has done over this past year and a half, 2 years, to bring the fan base back in, to have everybody re-engaged, to make Broncos country what it should be, quite frankly. This whole fan base is used to winning. They are used to being one of the premier organizations of the NFL. Mike McGlinchey said today that this city deserves championship-level football because that's what they've come to expect over their entire existence. And just think, man, we're finally back to where Broncos country should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with that, let's sign off for tonight. But we have Broncos football in 48 hours, guys. Each of us thinks that this team is going to clinch a playoff spot, and I think most of Broncos country feels the same way. But again, thank you for watching the 5280 podcast on the MHRT network. Check out all of the shows that are throughout the course of the week on the network. And they all are running live where you can actually be participating as well, which is really the fun part of this. But thank you so much for your comments. Thank you for your support, and go Broncos.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Tempo's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flight miles. So high, I might never come